If you've made it this far, you may have already watched the first 2 films in this series. You know that, according to the First Law of Hermeticism, everything is mind, and therefore the way you perceive reality shapes your experience of the world. In the second film, you saw that external reality corresponds to what is happening inside, and that recurring situations in life are not coincidences, but clues to a pattern. And this is precisely where many people stop in frustration. Because if you understand these principles and see the mechanisms, why do you still sometimes feel overwhelmed? Why, despite awareness, do you still return to the same tensions, reactions, relationships, or a sense of meaninglessness? The third law of Hermeticism, the law of vibration, answers precisely this missing element. It shows that between understanding and real change, there is still one level that is rarely discussed: the state from which you function every day. In this film, you will learn what vibration really is in the Hermetic sense, how to distinguish thoughts from the actual level of energy you are in, and why attempts at positive thinking so often end in exhaustion and a sense of falseness. You will learn to recognize what in your life lowers you, what stabilizes you, and what only temporarily raises you, leaving you empty. You will learn how to regulate yourself without fighting yourself, how to change your state rather than changing masks, and why this skill has a real impact on your relationships, decisions, and sense of meaning. If you feel that your life is stuck in a specific frequency and you want to understand how to get out of it soberly and practically, this episode is precisely for you. The law of vibration in Hermeticism sounds clear and direct. Nothing is at rest. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. This sentence is repeated so often today that it has become almost an empty slogan. Yet, in its original form, it describes one of the most essential properties of reality. Hermeticism is not talking here only about physical movement, which physics studies. It speaks of movement as a fundamental feature of existence at every level: mental, emotional, psychic, and material. Thoughts are movement, emotions are movement, attention is movement. Even a sense of meaning, or its lack, is not a fixed state, but a dynamic process. The problem begins when a person stops perceiving their experience as a process and starts treating it as something lasting and unchanging. When you say, "That's just how I am," very often you are not describing your essence, but the frequency at which you are currently functioning. The law of vibration restores the perspective of changeability and movement. It does not promise that you will always feel good or that life will become simple. It shows, however, something crucial. Since everything is movement, no state is final if energy and awareness exist. This changes how you view your difficulties. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What movement of energy is happening here and what sustains it?" At this point, you stop fighting life and begin to understand it as a process that can be regulated. And this is precisely where real space for change appears, not by denying what is, but by consciously participating in the movement. One of the most significant misunderstandings associated with the law of vibration is treating it as synonymous with single emotions. Very often you can hear, "I feel sadness, so my vibration is low," or "I feel excitement, so I am high." Meanwhile, Hermeticism distinguishes 2 completely different things: emotion as a temporary movement of energy and the base state in which a person functions every day. Emotions are natural, changeable, and needed. They appear as a reaction to stimuli, information, and experiences. Vibration, on the other hand, is something more stable. It is the background from which these emotions emerge and to which they return. You can experience sadness, grief, or anger while also being in a state of inner coherence and healthy regulation. You can also experience euphoria, enthusiasm, or stimulation, which does not necessarily mean high clarity, but rather an attempt to escape tension. The law of vibration does not teach eliminating emotions or judging them as good or bad. It teaches recognizing whether an emotion is flowing or whether it has been stopped by interpretation and resistance. When an emotion can move and complete, it does not lower vibration. On the contrary, it restores flow. The problem arises when an emotion becomes a filter through which you view your whole life. Then sadness stops being a signal and starts being an identity. The Hermetic approach is not to build an image of yourself based on temporary states. Instead, you learn to observe the dynamics, what appears, what stays, and what returns. This distinction brings enormous relief because you stop fighting emotions and, at the same time, stop being defined by them. In this sense, the law of vibration is a law of freedom. It does not promise the absence of difficult states, but it gives the ability to move between them without losing yourself. The law of vibration describes human experience as a continuous spectrum of states, rather than a simple division between good and evil. Hermeticism does not speak of high and low vibrations in a moral sense. It says instead of different degrees of energy density. There are heavier, more condensed states: fear, shame, guilt, apathy, cynicism, chronic tension. There are also lighter states: curiosity, calm, mindfulness, gratitude, joy, and love. Each of these states has its function and its information. The problem is not that a person experiences one of them, but that they get stuck in a narrow range of the spectrum and lose the ability to move. Then life begins to repeat itself, reactions become automatic, and the world seems either hostile or empty. Hermeticism emphasizes that maturity does not consist in permanently staying in light states, but in energetic flexibility. The greater range of movement you have, the greater your ability to adapt. You can feel anger, but you do not have to live in it. You can go through sadness, but you do not have to build a narrative about yourself out of it. The law of vibration teaches that change does not consist in jumping from one extreme to another, but in gradually shifting along the scale, from apathy to interest, from tension to breath, from chaos to one conscious step. This approach is sober and realistic because it does not require you to be someone you are not. It only requires a willingness to move. And where movement appears, the possibility of choice appears as well. And it is precisely here that the law of vibration truly begins to change the quality of life. One of the most practical aspects of the law of vibration is understanding resonance. Hermeticism does not say that you attract what you want or even what you think about most often. It says that you attract what you remain in energetic correspondence with. Resonance means that similar frequencies strengthen each other. If for a long time you function in tension, anxiety, or a sense of lack, the external world begins to respond with situations that activate these states. Not because the world has conspired, but because such a state becomes your default filter of perception and reaction. At this point, many people fall into the thinking trap. Why does the same thing keep happening to me? The law of vibration suggests a different question. From what state do I enter these situations? This is a subtle but fundamental difference. Resonance also works in relationships. We often attract people who touch our unrecognized tensions because these tensions are precisely what is active in our vibration. This is not punishment or a moral test. It is information. If a given state is dominant, it will be reflected. When you begin to regulate yourself, not only does your behavior change, but also what you notice at all and what you meet. Understanding resonance moves you from the role of a victim of fate to the role of an observer of patterns. And patterns, unlike fate, can be gradually modified, not by forcing change in the world, but by changing the quality of the state from which the world is experienced. One of the biggest mistakes in understanding the law of vibration is the belief that it is enough to work mentally. Meanwhile, Hermeticism never separated the mind from the body. The body is the instrument on which your experience of vibration is played out. The nervous system, breathing, muscle tension, the rhythm of sleep and wakefulness, all this directly affects the state in which you function. If the body is permanently tense, the breath shallow, and the organism operates in a mode of constant threat, then even the most conscious thoughts will not be able to change vibration. In such a state, affirmations sound like a lie, and attempts to be calm end in frustration. The law of vibration teaches the opposite approach. First, regulation, then reflection. Regulation means restoring the body's sense of safety and rhythm. Sometimes a few slower exhales, relaxing the shoulders, and conscious contact with the ground are enough to shift the whole system by one level on the spectrum. Hermeticism is in this place very sober and practical. It is not interested in escaping into abstraction, but in a fundamental change in the quality of experience. When the body begins to regulate, the mind stops fighting and emotions regain the ability to flow. That is precisely why so many profound insights appear not during intense thinking, but in moments of calming the body. From the perspective of the law of vibration, this is not a coincidence. It is a natural consequence of changing the system's frequency. And only from this place is lasting change possible at the level of decisions, relationships, and meaning. The law of vibration is very often mistakenly reduced to wishful thinking. Think positively and everything will change. Hermeticism approaches this much more precisely. It is not about single thoughts, but about the direction and habit of attention, which over time sets the base frequency of functioning. Thoughts and words act like tuning forks, not because they are magical, but because they organize attention, and attention strengthens certain states. If your attention regularly focuses on threats, lacks, comparisons, and pessimistic predictions, the vibration of the whole system gradually becomes denser. If, however, attention more often returns to the body, to the concrete, to what is really happening here and now, energy begins to stabilize. Hermeticism does not require controlling every thought, because that leads to tension. It teaches you to be aware of the dominant tone of your inner dialogue. Is it based on pressure and judgment, or on curiosity and observation? The words you use toward yourself and others also matter, not because they attract reality, but because they consolidate a particular way of experiencing. When you say, "I always have bad luck," you are not describing a fact, but strengthening the filter through which you will interpret subsequent events. The law of vibration shows that change does not consist in forbidding yourself negative thoughts, but in gradually shifting the center of gravity of attention. When attention stops circling abstract threats and begins to return to real experience, vibration changes. This is a slow but stable process, and that is precisely why it is effective. One of the key aspects of the law of vibration is that you do not function in a vacuum. Your frequency is not a closed system, but a dynamic field that constantly interacts with others and the environment. Hermeticism long ago indicated that emotional states, tension, calm, or chaos are contagious, not in a mystical sense, but through precise psychophysical mechanisms. Tone of voice, speaking pace, facial expression, body posture, and even the way thoughts are formulated affect how other people react when in contact with you. That is why, after some conversations, you feel exhausted, and after others, more present and calmer. The law of vibration does not teach isolating yourself from difficult people or judging them as toxic. It teaches conscious participation in relationships. Instead of asking, "What are they doing to me?" you begin to ask, "What am I reinforcing in this system?" Do you enter the role of rescuer? Do you lose boundaries? Do you take on someone else's tension as your own? These are regulatory questions, not accusing ones. The environment works similarly. Pace of work, number of stimuli, noise, lack of rhythm, constant stimulation, all of this affects the base vibration. Hermeticism reminds us that regulation does not consist in escaping the world, but in conscious selection of exposure. When you notice what dysregulates you and what stabilizes you, you regain influence, not through controlling others, but through responsibility for your own state. And it is precisely here that the law of vibration becomes a daily practice, not a theory. Hermeticism uses the concept of transmutation to describe the process of transforming one state into another. In the context of the law of vibration, transmutation does not mean fighting emotions or trying to jump from a difficult state to a pleasant one. Quite the opposite. It consists of fully acknowledging what is currently appearing and restoring the energy to move. Very many people try to change their state through denial. I shouldn't feel this. I must be more positive. These are bad emotions. Hermeticism sees an error in this because every emotion you resist becomes denser. Stopped energy does not disappear. It begins to organize your reactions, decisions, and relationships unconsciously. Transmutation starts with removing the narrative. Instead of telling a story about yourself and the world, you focus on sensation, tension in the body, accelerated breath, heaviness in the chest, racing thoughts. When you stop giving it meaning, energy regains movement. The next step is micro-intervention, not revolution. A few calmer exhales, changing body position, contact with the ground, water, movement. Only then does space appear for a new interpretation. In the Hermetic sense, thought does not initiate change. It stabilizes it. That is why true transmutation gives a feeling of relief and clarity, not an artificial high. If after practice you feel more presence and simplicity, vibration has changed. If you think it was only a temporary uplift followed by a sharp drop, it was an escape. Hermeticism is, in this place, merciless but honest. Actual change of state brings you closer to reality, not farther. One of the most practical applications of the law of vibration is its influence on decision-making. Very often, we focus on analyzing options. What pays off more? What is safer? What looks better in the eyes of others? Meanwhile, Hermeticism draws attention to something much more subtle and at the same time more decisive. From what inner state you make your choice. The same decision made from fear will have completely different consequences than one made from clarity, even if, on the logical level, it looks identical. When you choose from tension, your actions are reactive, defensive, and often short-sighted. When you choose from a sense of lack, your decisions are driven by desperation and quickly lead to disappointment. The law of vibration teaches that before you ask yourself what to do, it is worth asking another, what state am I in right now? Sometimes the best decision is not choosing a specific option, but regulating the state from which you will only then select. A few minutes of calming the body can completely change perspective. What previously seemed like the only way out suddenly turns out to be one of many. Hermeticism does not promise that you will always be sure of your decisions. It shows, however, that the more stable your state is, the smaller the emotional cost of choices. you notice that life does not require constant struggle from you, but increasingly better tuning. And it is precisely here that the law of vibration becomes a tool of daily wisdom, not an abstract theory. One of the biggest traps associated with the law of vibration is interpreting it superficially and simplistically. Today, one often encounters a narrative that urges one to always vibrate high, avoid difficult emotions, and focus exclusively on what is pleasant. Hermeticism stands in clear opposition to such an approach, not because it denies the existence of lighter states, but because suppressing heavier emotions reinforces them rather than transforming them. Toxic positivity is a form of spiritual bypassing, an attempt to jump over experience instead of living it. In practice, it means that a person tells themselves, "I am calm," while their body remains tense and the nervous system operates in alarm mode. The law of vibration does not reward such strategies. It works mercilessly and consistently. It strengthens what is present, not what is declared. Another trap is treating high vibration as a goal. Then spirituality becomes another ego project, and every drop in mood is interpreted as failure. Hermeticism reminds us that the goal is not maintaining one state, but the ability to regulate and return to balance. Anger, sadness, or fear are not the problem. The problem is a lack of awareness and a lack of movement. When energy can move, even difficult states fulfill an informational and integrating function. The law of vibration teaches maturity. Instead of escaping into artificial highs, you learn to be present in what is and gradually transform the state from the inside. This approach is not flashy, but it is effective and stable. In closing, it is worth considering the law of vibration in the broader context of the series. The first law of Hermeticism said that everything is mind, that reality is not something completely external, but is co-created via perceiving and interpreting. The second law showed that there is a correspondence between levels. What is internal reflects in the external. The third law, the law of vibration, adds to this the dynamics of time and state. It shows that not only what you think and the patterns you have matter, but also the frequency with which you live your life. Vibration determines the quality of experience in each moment. You can have awareness and knowledge, but if you function in a state of chronic tension, life will feel heavy. You can have difficult circumstances, but if you are in a state of regulation and presence, the experience will be different. Integrating these three laws leads to an efficient conclusion. It is not about controlling the world, but about influencing the point from which the world is experienced. The law of vibration offers a tool for daily practice, the possibility of checking, regulating, and correcting your own state, rather than an endless fight with symptoms. This is not a promise of an easy life, but a promise of greater agency and clarity. In the next Hermetic laws, you will see how vibration arranges itself into polarities, rhythms, and relationships of cause and effect. At this stage, however, the most critical question is, what state dominates in my life, and what is the smallest step I can take today to regulate it? Real change begins with this answer.